It's been 5 years since Monique Baugh, a once rising Minneapolis real estate agent and devoted mother of two, unknowingly walked into a sinister trap and became the pawn in a calculated revenge plot. You're in for a pretty chilling crime tale here. Real estate can be a great way to make some money, but it is also a ruthless business. But in the case of Monique Baugh, it wasn't just about deals and commissions. It was about creating a better life for her family that she loved so much. She was indeed a successful and hardworking 28-year-old mother of two. Monique had carved out such an impressive career at quite a young age. And this, she did all while radiating confidence and charm that drew people to her like a magnet. However, unfortunately, it was that same drive and professionalism that led her into a horrifying trap that literally ended with her death. It's December 31st, 2019, a day that should have been filled with celebrations and New Year's Eve plans. Instead, it became a day of terror. Monique, full of enthusiasm, thought she was going to a house showing in Maple Grove. She was fully ready to charm her clients as she stepped out for this routine appointment. But that wasn't exactly what she stepped into. Instead, she walked right into the kind of nightmare even Hollywood would hesitate to script. This was a whole setup. If you're hooked already, don't forget to like and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories. A fake house showing was orchestrated by an evil-minded woman, Elsa Segura, a former probation officer who traded in her badge for a starring role in a murder plot. We must say, if irony could kill, Segura wouldn't have needed accomplices. Using her burner phone, Segura contacted Monique under the guise of being an interested buyer for a property. She expressed urgency, the kind that realtors would definitely not be able to ignore, and Monique, ever the professional, agreed to meet her at the Maple Grove property. What Monique didn't know was that this meeting would be the last and final meeting of her life. And as she arrived at the house, Barry and Davis ambushed her, binding and gagging her before throwing her into the back of a U-Haul truck. What followed after that was just hours and hours of unimaginable terror. A former probation officer turned villain and her accomplices. Now, let's take a better look at the villains in our story, Segura. It seems pretty pathetic that she used her incredible criminal justice background not to serve society, but to completely betray it. She did so by posing under a fake name because the world can't know what this bad cop was up to, right? Segura used a burner phone to lure Monique to the Maple Grove home while tempting her with the prospect of a really good deal. Another thing worth noting here is that Segura wasn't working alone, because hey, wouldn't it be more fun for the bad cop to have friends to assist with the murder? She was part of a filthy group that included her then-boyfriend Lyndon Wiggins and his psychopath friends Cedric Barry and Barry Davis, who were very willing to be a part of this murder. The plot wasn't just cold-blooded. It's a shame to say that Monique lost her life to something absurdly petty too. Wiggins, a drug dealer, had harbored a grudge against Monique's boyfriend, John Mitchell Momo. Apparently, their story goes something like this. Wiggins thought Mitchell Momo was a snitch because nothing says, "I'm a stable individual," like arranging a whole kidnapping and murder over a personal grudge. And this was his way of taking revenge on him. Lyndon Wiggins, who was clearly the mastermind of the plot, already had a bad reputation for doing the right thing. The drug dealer with a grudge could have just targeted the one who may have been his ultimate problem, which would have still been a crime. But no, he wasn't content with simple revenge against John Mitchell Momo, Monique's boyfriend. No, he had to turn his vendetta into a blood-soaked spectacle affecting innocent families. To Wiggins, Mitchell Momo wasn't just some enemy. He was an accusation that led Wiggins to come up with the most twisted form of retaliation imaginable. Then of course we have Cedric Barry and Barry Davis, who played the roles of the foot soldiers in this grotesque operation. These two were the muscles, tasked with executing the plan quite literally. They would take it from the kidnapping to the brutal murder of Monique. Their involvement sure does give people chills about how detachment some people can be from humanity. The plan was pretty simple. Segura would lure Monique to the house, Barry and Davis would kidnap her, and Wiggins would just sit there and enjoy taking his revenge in the chaos. And chaos it was indeed. When Monique arrived at the house, she was immediately ambushed, tied up, and thrown into the back of a U-Haul truck like a piece of furniture. Definitely not the showing the poor woman was expecting. Elsa Segura literally played the role of the wolf in sheep's clothing. The former probation officer, Segura played the role of the bait, using her professional demeanor and knowledge of the system to draw Monique into the trap. If loyalty to her boyfriend Wiggins were a competition, Segura would win gold, though at the cost of her own humanity. Meanwhile, back at her home in Minneapolis, John Mitchell Momo was facing his own share of troubles. As Monique was being tortured in the truck, her boyfriend was ambushed and heartlessly shot right in front of their two young daughters, aged just 1 and 3. It's safe to say that the fact that he survived is nothing short of miraculous. But nothing can take away the psychological scars left on the children. Of course, Monique's heartless kidnappers didn't stop at kidnapping her. No, they had to escalate things to an almost unimaginably cruel level. She was then taken to an alley in North Minneapolis, where she was shot brutally, not once but multiple times, and left to die alone in the cold, where her body was just left there with no one to find out. Her body was found in the early hours of the 1st of January 2020. What a horrible way to start the next year. The whole reason behind this execution wasn't just another crime. It was their way of sending a twisted, vindictive message aimed at her boyfriend, all because cranky Wiggins couldn't let go of his petty grievances. But the message didn't end with Monique. As you can see, her death sent shockwaves through her family, her community, and even the legal system, which we'll be getting to in a bit. The fallout and the pursuit of justice. With the proper investigation into Monique's murder, the police successfully arrested 5 people, including Segura, Barry, Davis, and Wiggins. Prosecutors painted a shocking picture of the events leading up to the crime, with Segura's role as the bait proving her to be one of the most chief roles in the crime. Her decision to use her revered skills and knowledge for such monstrous purposes was definitely both shocking and enraging to everyone hearing this news. Initially, Segura was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. For many, this seemed like justice, seemed like it was a very fitting end for someone who played a central role in this cold-blooded crime. But then again, when has justice always been straightforward? In a decision that left Monique's family reeling, the Minnesota Supreme Court reversed Segura's conviction in 2023. Now, why would they do such a thing? Because apparently, the jury instructions were pretty flawed, and there wasn't enough proof to prove that Segura knew what her accomplices would do after she set up the fake showing. Yep, you heard right. Her role in organizing an entire kidnapping that led to murder wasn't enough to keep her behind bars for life. Talk about the injustice we live in. Instead of life without parole, which according to me would have been a more fitting punishment, if not less, Segura was handed a 20-year sentence after pleading guilty to kidnapping. The judge Mark Kappelhoff called her actions horrific and did very clearly see the particular cruelty of the crime, but his hands were tied by the plea deal. Segura, for her part, refused to speak during her sentencing. Perhaps she was at a loss for words, or perhaps she finally realized that there was no point in trying to justify herself after committing something so horrible. For Monique's family, the reduced sentence was a slap in the face. Her mother, Monique Baugh, was absolutely miserable upon hearing that the woman who murdered her precious child would then run free in 20 years to live her own selfish life. She said, "We were content knowing that she would spend the rest of her life in prison, as she should." The pain of losing Monique was only exaggerated by the knowledge that her killer would one day walk free. And who knows, maybe she'd do the same horrific thing to someone else. Monique's daughters, now growing up without their mother, only have her grave to visit, where they also celebrate her birthdays and hold on to the memories of a mother who adored them. In their grief, the family also created a children's book inspired by Monique's bedtime storytelling, one of the very few memories the children were left with. It sure is a small but meaningful way to keep her spirit alive. Now, if you thought the details of Monique Baugh's murder were already twisted enough, we're only at the beginning of it, because the story only gets darker. It wasn't just a crime. It was a whole mix of betrayal, cowardice, and misplaced vendettas, organized by that group of morally bankrupt individuals who decided that kidnapping and murder were suitable substitutes for adult problem-solving. Think of the scene of horror they caused at their home. They couldn't even keep the crime away from the kids. While torturing the mother of the little children, they made sure that she wasn't the only one enduring this nightmare. It's like they wanted a family with the little kids to face this. It's heartbreaking to think of how John Mitchell Momo was attacked and shot multiple times without even performing the execution away from their 2 young daughters. The 1-year-old might just have not been able to comprehend what had happened, but the 3-year-old children witnessed this act of brutality at a time when her memory was properly functioning. That child's going to have to live with that memory forever. Any sane human would have known that's an insane amount of pain to inflict on an adult, let alone a child. By God's grace, John was able to make it alive after the attack, but the trauma inflicted on him and his children would still be something that cannot be justified with the measly sentence of 20 years that Elsa received. Nope, that pain is going to remain etched in their lives forever. The aftermath, a trail of pain. As news of Monique's brutal murder spread, the whole community was left in shock. They knew her as a young, ambitious mother, and now she had been stolen from her family in the most horrific way possible. Her daughters, who were still just babies, would grow up without their mother's love and guidance, which would leave a permanent void in their hearts. Her boyfriend, though physically recovering from his injuries, would forever bear to carry with him the emotional scars of losing Monique. The ripple effects of her murder were felt far beyond just her immediate family. Friends, colleagues, and even strangers mourned the loss of a woman who had worked so hard to create a bright future for herself and her family. But it was so unfairly cut short. Anyway, thank God the Minneapolis Police Department didn't waste any time launching a full-scale investigation, lest those vicious people run free. As the pieces of the puzzle started coming together, it became evident that this was no random act of violence. The level of planning involved pointed directly to a calculated revenge plot. Luckily, it wasn't too long before the suspects were identified and arrested. Wiggins, Barry, Davis, and Segura were all taken into custody, along with another accomplice who wasn't mentioned much before, called Shantae Davis. Now this guy is just as bad as anyone else who was involved in the crime, and he was charged for aiding an offender. The evidence against them was horrifying. From phone records linking Segura to the burner phone used to lure Monique, to witness testimonies and surveillance footage, it became clear that each member of the group had played a specific role in the crime. The legal proceedings were indeed a roller coaster of emotions, especially for Monique's family. Each trial brought back the painful memories of her loss, but it also offered a glimmering hope for justice. Initially, Cedric Barry and Barry Davis were sentenced to life without parole, again a sentence that felt appropriate for them as well, given the sheer cruelty of their actions. Wiggins, the mastermind, also faced a life sentence, though his case would later take a controversial turn. Segura's trial, on the other hand, was particularly contentious. As the one who plotted the fake house showing, her role was again very pivotal. Prosecutors argued that without her involvement, the crime wouldn't have been possible, and none of this would have happened to Monique. But Segura's defense team claimed that she had no idea the plan would end in murder. But it's pretty evident they were just saying what they had to say to get her out of jail time, or at least reduce it. Thankfully, as we mentioned earlier, the jury didn't buy her excuses. In 2021, Segura was convicted of first-degree murder and sentenced to life without parole. For Monique's family, this verdict was a bittersweet moment, a small victory in the face of overwhelming loss. But then again, just when it seemed like justice had been served, the Minnesota Supreme Court threw a wrench into the case. Just a year ago, Segura's conviction was overturned due to insufficient evidence and flawed jury instructions. The decision was a devastating blow to Monique's family, reopening wounds they had worked so hard to heal. So just like we mentioned, Segura's case was sent back to district court, where she ultimately struck a plea deal. In exchange for pleading guilty to kidnapping, she was sentenced to 20 years in prison, which is clearly far less than the life sentence she had previously faced. The decision left Monique's loved ones feeling very betrayed by a justice system that seemed more concerned with legal technicalities than the devastating consequences of the crime. Let's get a more detailed look into the aftermath of the crime. If the murder of Monique Baugh revealed the horrid capabilities of the human spirit, its aftermath uncovered the fragility of those left to pick up the pieces. For Monique's family, friends, and even the broader Minneapolis community, the pain of her loss didn't end with the trials and convictions. Instead, it surely must have evolved into a chronic wound. What the murderers hadn't thought of before committing such a horrendous act is that Monique wasn't just a name in the headlines. She was a daughter, a mother, a cousin, and a friend. She meant so much to so many people, and that her two young daughters, at the time of her death, were robbed of a lifetime of love and guidance. The trauma of witnessing their father shot in front of them, and then losing their mother in such a gruesome manner, would haunt them indefinitely. But what's it to the heartless killers? What would people so cruel know about the heartbreak of losing a family member? Even Monique's cousin, Cheryl Sinkfield, described the immense void her absence left behind. Raised more as sisters than cousins, the two shared an unbreakable bond. She just had this confidence and glow about her, Sinkfield recalled in interviews. You just wanted to have whatever dose of Monique she had. To cope with their loss, Monique's family turned to creative outlets. Monique's mother, Wanda Williams Baugh, and her daughters co-wrote a children's book titled Ruby and Onyx and the Magical Pillow Adventure, based on Monique's habit of reading to her girls from a purple pillow. The book became a way for the family to honor her memory while providing a source of inspiration for her children. But even such touching tributes couldn't compensate for the amount of grief they would be going through. The legal journey following Monique's murder was a series of emotional highs and lows for her family. Initially, the convictions of Lyndon Wiggins, Cedric Barry, Barry Davis, and Elsa Segura offered a semblance of justice. But the Minnesota Supreme Court's decision to overturn Segura's life sentence in 2023 reopened old wounds. The court's ruling, citing insufficient evidence and faulty jury instructions, yet again let down the family members and loved ones. How could someone so clearly involved in setting the deadly plot in motion receive such a reprieve? It was probably Segura's cunning move of pleading guilty to the kidnapping that earned her some sympathy in front of the law, and she was sentenced to only 2 decades in prison, with credit for nearly more than 4 years already served by now. For Monique's mother, Wanda, the reduced sentence felt like a total letdown. And how could it not? She had lost her little girl, the one she took the pains to bring to this world and raise. Surely she never dared to envision a future like this for her child. We were content knowing that she would spend the rest of her life in prison, as she should, Wanda said during one of Segura's court hearings. But it didn't really last that long now, did it? And of course, Segura only decided to make it worse for the family by putting up an unnecessary or sly attitude in court. Adding to the family's anguish was the behavior of Segura herself. Declining to speak during sentencing hearings, Segura's apparent lack of remorse only deepened the family's pain. At one point, a family member couldn't contain their grief, yelling, "Do you understand what you did?" before being escorted out of the courtroom. This has us all wondering, does this woman truly feel no remorse? In response to this horrific incident the realtor had to face, local realtors called for heightened safety measures, including stricter protocols for meeting new clients. The tragedy served as a wake-up call, spurring changes in an industry that had previously overlooked such risks. But beyond the professional realm, Monique's case struck a chord with the public. Her murder became a representation of how senseless violence can devastate not just individuals but entire communities. Vigils and fundraisers were held in her honor, with the proceeds going to support her daughters and their future. While Monique's family sought to preserve her memory through whatever positive efforts they could do that with, the ongoing legal battles served as a constant reminder of their loss. In addition to Segura's reduced sentence, the mastermind Lyndon Wiggins also received a second chance. How much more unfair can this get? His life sentence, too, was overturned on the same grounds as Segura's. What can I say? Flawed jury instructions. The prospect of another trial for Wiggins must have surely set the family's progress on moving on way behind. Sinkfield, speaking on behalf of Monique's loved ones, expressed their collective frustration. Why should anyone involved in such a horrific crime be eligible for any type of freedom? She asked, echoing the sentiment of a community that felt let down by the justice system. And don't we all think she is right? Monique's case did not just make headlines in the local papers, it gained national attention, appearing in true crime documentaries and news specials. A Hulu series, Me Hereafter, aimed to shed light on Monique's life rather than just her death, showcasing the vibrant and loving person she was. The show highlighted the resilience of her family and their efforts to ensure Monique was remembered as more than just a victim. Did you find Monique Baugh's story chilling? If you did, you won't believe the terrifying tale of a twisted saga of betrayal, deceit, and a murder that will leave you questioning everything. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more gripping true crime stories that will keep you on the edge of your seat. And if you're eager for more chilling tales, dive into our video and unravel the darkest secrets of true crime. See you in the next one.